Hollywood is in a state of crisis, and for the most part, it is a crisis entirely of its own making. The audience has been driven away by questionable creative choices. Streaming has killed off multiple far bigger revenue streams, and the streaming wars have even cut down the overall streaming revenue by driving audiences back to piracy. We have covered all of these in past videos, but there is another major contributing factor which has directly led to the downfall of Hollywood as the institution that it used to be, and that is excessive budgets and over-reliance on IP. In the last few days alone, 2 major IP-driven reboots have been announced, Resident Evil and Little House on the Prairie. Fairly different properties, I know, yet they're both symptomatic of an issue Hollywood has yet to address. And until they do, no true recovery can happen. Let's dive in. This video is sponsored by Saley. For decades now, Hollywood has been overly reliant on IP, both on the big and small screen. Case in point, Marvel and Star Wars has dominated the box office, and the big draws for Disney Plus were also Marvel and Star Wars. Not that that worked out for either brand or for Disney Plus. Meanwhile, over at Warner, getting Superman and DC right is one of Zaslaw's major priorities, because his opinion going in was that these brands were supposed to pay for everything else. In reality though, DC has lost Warner hundreds of millions in the past few years. Beyond those, filmmaker Lee Whannell just made a pretty good story about the Native American mythological Wendigo, but it was supposed to be Wolfman, so that didn't really work out at the box office. Yet, doubling down on what is clearly a risky strategy, Hollywood is nonetheless going all in on the IP approach, as we shall see, rebooting both Resident Evil and Little House on the Prairie. But before we get into the pitfalls and problems with that, as many of you know, I'm Norwegian, though I'm currently residing in the Canary Islands, or the Outer Rim as I like to call it, for it is that remote. Naturally, I travel a lot, and I always have to stay connected, which can be a challenge when traveling in foreign locations with your SIM and plan from home. And if you even get a connection, roaming costs are going to soar. When I last went back to my native Norway though, with 2 holdovers along the way, I had no issues as I was using Saley, who has kindly agreed to sponsor this video. Saley is an eSIM. That's functionally a SIM card, only it's software you download to your device, and it allows you to switch between affordable eSIM plans, which significantly reduces or even eliminates roaming costs. It also eliminates the need for any local physical SIM cards from dodgy operators, and with Saley you don't even need to download a new eSIM for each country, you just switch between the local plans. There's no more need to wander around looking for public Wi-Fi spots. With Saley, you're always connected. All you have to do is download the Saley app, which is available for both Android and iOS. Once you've installed it, buy a plan, and there are over 180 available in 8 different regions to choose from. Here you can even find global and regional plans that fit your needs. When you've found your plan, this is where you apply our exclusive code MIDNIGHT to get 15% off your plan. Then you simply have to install your new eSIM and stay connected. Saley offers 24/7 chat support, and in the unlikely event that your device isn't eSIM compatible, you'll get a full refund, so there's no risk in trying it out. So, get an exclusive 15% discount on Saley eSIM data plans. Just download the Saley app and use our code MIDNIGHT on checkout. And with that, let's get back into this week's reboots. On January 24th, The Hollywood Reporter published the exclusive that Zach Cregger is overseeing a reboot of Resident Evil. Cregger's claim to fame is being the filmmaker behind Barbarian, a movie the Conan fan in me found to have a very misleading title, but that is neither here nor there. Hollywood recognizes his talent and they are excited. With the success of both Super Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog, Five Nights at Freddy, and Fallout in the recent past, many feel that video game adaptations may be the next big thing, and Resident Evil is a very well-known brand. Therein, of course, lies the problem, and I'll get back to that momentarily. But first, The Hollywood Reporter writes, Kreger was an actor and comedian who reinvented himself as a cutting-edge filmmaker with Barbadian, the 2022 cult hit that he wrote and directed. It also established him as a new voice in horror, and when he went out with his follow-up horror project, a bidding war erupted. That upcoming film, titled Weapons, was won by Warner's New Line division and saw him become a Final Cut director. And jumping forward a bit, the combination of Kreger paired with an established intellectual property is also likely to be something too tempting to pass up, no matter the cost. The Resident Evil movies, based on the Capcom video games, were a mix of horror, sci-fi, and action genres and followed the adventures of a heroine who fights zombies and the Umbrella Corporation, the bio-warfare company that let loose the monsters. The movies have grossed over $1.2 billion worldwide. Kreger's take is described by sources as a revamp that will take the title to its horror roots and be more faithful to the initial games, which date back to 1996. That is all good and well, but there is a problem here. Let's get into it. Resident Evil has already been the subject of 6 feature films starring Milla Jovovich, a 2021 feature film reboot, a 2022 live-action Netflix series reboot, and on top of that, 4 animated films tying in with the games, and a 4-part animated series. This reboot from Kreger then would be the 4th live-action version of Resident Evil, and supposedly more true to the source material than the other 3. If it is, that's cool I guess, but I can't help but feel that there are a ton of other video games out there, including with similar aesthetic and gameplay as Resident Evil, so maybe it would have been more prudent to adapt one of those for the first time than Resident Evil for the 4th. The Hollywood thinking though is that because of those 3 prior iterations, Resident Evil is a known brand, which it is. Yet I think audiences would have been more appreciative of something new than what will be, if we ignore the different continuities, the 8th live-action Resident Evil movie. And that wasn't even the most egregious reboot announced this week. On January 29th, Deadline Hollywood reported that Netflix will be rebooting Little House on the Prairie. If you haven't heard about it, that is a Western historical drama television series loosely based on the best-selling Little House on the Prairie book series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, which ran from 1974 to 1982. It has appeared continuously in syndication ever since and is widely available on streaming, so while not the biggest of genre IPs, it remains well known and has an audience. And that audience was horrified to learn of the reboot, as the Daily Mail reported in their story, Netflix reboots iconic 70s family drama, leaving fans furious. We don't need this. Considering that Disney already rebooted it in 2004, and that left zero cultural footprint, they're probably right. But let's focus on the newly announced reboot and the Daily Mail story. Without going into too much detail, the reported fan sentiment is that the existing audience would rather the iconic series be left in the past and live forever in streaming and syndication, as they do not quite believe in Netflix's ability to redo the magic of the original, to put it that way. In other words, the built-in audience, the ones most prone to liking the series and drive word of mouth, are already rooting for it to fail. Without that fanbase, what is the pitch to everyone else? Hey modern audience, here is a reboot of a classic you might never have heard about, but the fans of that classic have already written this off, so come check it out. They've tried that approach with many other properties before. It's pretty much never worked out in the past, and there's very little reason to think this will buck that trend. So why do it? If they want a Western series based on books, there are plenty other book series that likely would have far greater appeal, like Morgan Kane. But unlike House on the Prairie, Morgan Kane isn't a known IP to the general public, even if said general public doesn't want another House on the Prairie. They might have responded to Morgan Kane though, if given the opportunity to do so. But Hollywood didn't give them that opportunity. Instead, they gave them a known IP the audience doesn't necessarily want. Let's be honest here, beyond Hollywood itself, there are two other major culprits in this state of affairs. That would be the entertainment media press and the audience itself. Beginning with the entertainment media press, which itself exists in symbiosis with Hollywood, they have for decades now made the editorial decision to give excess coverage to branded properties the audience already is familiar with, while often ignoring original properties. This is, in a sense, understandable, in that something the audience already are familiar with will get more clicks and views. But that, in turn, means that most coverage and therefore promotion beyond the ad campaign itself will actually go towards the various sequels, remakes, and reboots, leaving original content more difficult to discover, and therefore much more likely to underperform financially, thereby prompting the studios to invest more in branded properties the audience already knows. This is a vicious cycle, and the audience must take their part of the blame for it as well, as the audience ultimately are the ones that choose to ignore the original content there is, but instead flock to the branded content they know, and then complain about the lack of originality after the fact. And that's the generation that still remembers when branded fare was an exception, not the rule. For years now, almost all major 4-quadrant blockbuster releases have been IP-driven or released under the larger comic book movie umbrella. So for the generation now reared on those movies, that is, quite often, all they can relate to. Or perhaps more accurately, all the Hollywood decision-makers think the contemporary movie-going audience can relate to. For instance, as my colleague Tom likes to point out, a movie like Taxi Driver or King of Comedy couldn't be made today, not for any technical reason, but because the Hollywood decision-makers believe, rightly or wrongly, that audiences can't relate to such a movie. But if you put it in a comic book wrapping and call it Joker though, now the audience will be intrigued and the studio will know how to sell it. Never mind the sequel for the moment, the original Joker was a smash hit. But why? Was it because it was the Joker? Because that was a very different Joker indeed, and writer and director Todd Phillips hinted right away that this might not be the Joker that Batman went up against, yet the movie resonated worldwide. The sequel, by contrast, flopped hardcore, also worldwide. It didn't sit right with anyone, yet it still had the superficial Joker skin in common with the first movie, which was a smash hit. I submit the first Joker movie wasn't a hit because of the superficial Joker skin, though that obviously helped its marketing, but because it was the right movie at the right time, and it appealed to audiences worldwide for that reason, and it would have done so even without the superficial Joker skin. I think if it had been the exact same movie, only with the title The Jester, and had Arthur Fleck appear as a court jester instead of a very different brand of Joker, that movie would still have been a worldwide phenomenon. It just would have taken slightly longer to get there. If I'm right about that, and I think I am, Hollywood does have a way out of this mess. Looking back at the most classic movies of all time, you'll find some novel adaptations in there, but for the most part, we are dealing with high-concept original stories. Those are what will pass the test of time. Since the millennium though, how many movies will stand the test of time, and how many of them are original properties as opposed to comic book adaptations and assorted remakes and reboots? Case in point, Quentin Tarantino himself has declared the current era of filmmaking as the worst in Hollywood history, saying that the movies that don't conform are the ones that stand out from the pack. And he is on the money, for there is indeed a pack, in a way there hasn't been since almost everything was westerns back in the 50s. And wouldn't you know it, the movies that are remembered from the 50s aren't the westerns that were dominating everything at the time. It's the ones that stood out from that pack. The way out for Hollywood today, then, is what they already did in the 60s and 70s. Break up the pack and create more high-concept, non-IP-driven original movies. Audiences aren't the sheep the Hollywood decision-makers would appear to think. Or are they? Do you feel like a sheep? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, get an exclusive 15% discount on Saley eSIM data plans. Just download the Saley app and use our code MIDNIGHT at checkout.